What's going on YouTube? In today's video, we're reacting to some Mr. Ballen top 3 photos with disturbing backstories. If you want to see more of these type of recordings, make sure y'all like and subscribe. That being said, let's get into it.
Picture or video.
No offense to Mr. Ballen, I'm gonna go ahead and skip through it. Mercy Road.
On the evening of December 29, 1986, a California Highway Patrol officer named Craig Pyre drove his cruiser down Interstate 15 in San Diego, California. With him was an NBC News reporter in the back seat, and there was a cameraman in the passenger seat. They were filming a segment about highway travel safety that was set to air on the evening news later that night. Officer Pyre was following his typical patrol route, but after a few minutes, they passed by a sign that said Mercy Road. It was an exit. And at that point, Officer Pyre turned to the news team, pointed at Mercy Road, and said, "That's where they found the body." So a little more than 36 hours earlier, at around 4 a.m. the previous morning, a 20-year-old college student named Kara Knott had been found strangled to death in a creek right near the Mercy Road exit. Kara had been on her way home from her boyfriend's house when, for whatever reason, maybe car troubles or maybe she was trying to help someone, but she wound up in that cul-de-sac. And then while she was there, she clearly encountered someone dangerous who took her life. And so this was actually why the California Highway Patrol and NBC News were collaborating on this news segment. So the idea behind this segment was basically to tell drivers along this highway, like, how to stay safe while they were out there, especially if for whatever reason they had to stop somewhere along the highway, like what to do in that situation. And so as Officer Pyre passed by the Mercy Road exit and continued down Interstate 15, he turned to the news crew, and as they filmed, he began talking about the basics of highway travel safety. Specifically, he said, look, one of the most hazardous things that can happen to you beyond an accident on the highway is if you have some sort of car trouble that forces you to stop on the highway. Because once you stop, there's an inclination for a lot of people to want to leave their vehicle. But that's a very dangerous thing to do.
Anything could happen. Being a female, you could be raped, robbed if you're a male.
He probably the killer.
All the way to where you could be.
Because why are we talking about that,
also
bro? Why
warned
we talking about
people
female
not to
getting
get
raped
into
or
a
robbed?
stranger's car, because there was a running theory at this
He might
point
be
that
one.
perhaps Kara had gotten into her killer's car. As this particular segment was filmed, the one you just watched, Officer Pyre was looking ahead, and he noticed there was a car pulled over on the shoulder of the highway with its hazards on. So he turned to the news crew and basically said, look, here's a chance for us to actually show the people in real time what to do in case your car breaks down on the highway. So he pulled his cruiser over right behind the stalled car, he got out, and then gestured for the news crew to come with him. Officer Pyre walked over to the passenger side door of this car, and through the open window, he asked the driver to get out and talk to him. The driver did, and as the camera rolled, Officer Pyre asked him to explain, what's going on here.
Bro, this is about to be crazy. Interviewing a fucking murderer, bro. Let's
Happened
get
to
into
the car.
it.
The driver said he had run out of gas and then gotten stranded on the side of the road. And then he had left his car and walked to a gas station to get a gas can, came all the way back, he put the gas into his car, but his car still wouldn't start. Now, at this point, Officer Pyre is realizing that this driver is doing basically exactly what he shouldn't be doing, according to the safety tips Officer Pyre had given. And so on camera, he basically says to this guy, do you understand how dangerous it is to have left your car like that and walked alone on this highway? Do you understand what a hazard that is? And the driver just kind of looked at him and shrugged.
He wasn't walking home. He wasn't walking nowhere but
after that,
to kill
Officer Pyre
somebody,
called
bro.
in a tow truck. His car was towed, and the man was on his way. And Officer Pyre got back into the cruiser with the news crew, and they carried on. After that, Officer Pyre and the news crew wrapped up filming, and then after he dropped them back off again, they told him what time to expect his segment to air on NBC that night. And sure enough, that evening, Officer Pyre was in front of a TV as the broadcast started. And when Officer Pyre's actual segment aired on TV, to him and to the California Highway Patrol, it went great. It was a minute and a half long. It sort of hit all the high points. It showed Officer Pyre, talking about how to be safe on the highway and talking to the stranded motorists. It kind of did exactly what they expected it to do. And when it was over, Officer Pyre clicked off the TV and didn't think much about it because it was not a big deal. It was just a basic safety video. And for the vast majority of other people who watched this clip live on TV, it really didn't stand out to them. Again, it was just kind of a routine police safety video. But there were a few people, when they watched this clip, that noticed something very specific.
Hold
And
on.
within an hour of this clip airing on TV, those few people were calling the police in droves to tell them, we know what happened to Kara Knott. And the police would follow up on these tips. And sure enough, just over 2 weeks later, they had gathered enough evidence that they were able to arrest Kara Knott's killer. It would turn out all the clues the police needed to solve the Kara Knott murder case were right there in that 1.5 minute long video. Because what happened to Kara had almost happened to over 24 other women in San Diego. And those young women were the ones who saw the news segment when it happened live, and they noticed this particular detail that clearly telegraphed who Kara's killer was.
Was that her car?
They were the ones who called police. On the night of Kara's murder, December 27th, 1986, she pulled off Interstate 15 on the Mercy Road exit, and she came to a stop in that cul-de-sac. Now, we don't know exactly why she came to a stop in there, but either way, she was there, and that's where she encountered her killer. Now, the other 24 women who encountered the same person, the killer, they were terrorized and kind of tortured and held hostage for a couple of hours, but eventually were let go. But Kara wasn't. During her encounter, at some point, the killer clubbed her over the head and then strangled her to death with a rope. Now, the killer, at first, had gotten away with this, until they were featured on that 1.5 minute long video. And some of those women who had survived their attack, they're watching the segment, and suddenly their attacker is on TV. Now, they had previously reported their attack to police, but to this point, nothing had been done. And now they're staring at
he probably know
the
he's
person
cooked.
who attacked them.
That's probably why he wasn't talking.
And critically, as part of this segment, they're hearing about how this other young woman had been attacked and killed on this highway. And they're thinking, oh, this person did that to me. I barely got away. I bet they killed this girl. And on top of that, as they're watching the news, staring at their attacker, they can see there's a fresh cut over their eye. And so put that all together and they thought,
crazy,
boom,
bro.
That's the person who killed Kara Knott. And sure enough, the police would follow up on these tips and they would confirm that the man in the video with the cut over his eyebrow was Kara's killer. And Kara's killer was none other than Officer Craig Pyre. Officer Pyre was found guilty of murder and sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. Since being incarcerated,
Get the
he has
fuck
gone out
outta
for
here.
parole 2 separate times and been rejected both times. However, he is up for parole again in
Bro, I was
2027.
right the whole time. Nah, this nigga's weird, bro. That's crazy. Bro, ain't no way. I was right, bro. There's no way. That nigga was really weird, bro. I ain't gonna lie. I had, like, the way he looked and the way he was talking. Why was he talking about such and such, right? A girl getting R-worded and things like that. It only made sense. Now approaching.
Around 1 p.m. on November 28, 1979, a 52-year-old tour guide named Peter Mulgrew.
I'm sorry, Peter Mulgrew. God damn, bro. Your head is fuck. You know what I'm saying, bro?
Stood at the front of the cabin of Air New Zealand flight TE901. Out the window next to him, he looked out and he saw this vast white landscape reflecting the afternoon sun. And so he grabbed the microphone and announced to the 237 passengers that they were now flying over Antarctica. The passengers got really excited and immediately pulled out their cameras and began snapping photos left and right. And as you can see from some of the photos that they took, a lot of the passengers actually got up out of their seats and moved around to get the best angle of the ground down below. Now, on
That's
a normal
hard, I ain't gonna
commercial
lie.
flight, that behavior would not be okay. You can't just, wander all around the cabin. You need to basically stay seated. But this was not a normal commercial flight. This was a sightseeing flight. Air New Zealand regularly took off from New Zealand and would fly people up over Antarctica, and their tour
Thing
guide
about that shit is, bro, that's super dangerous. I feel like. I understand they pay to see it, but damn, bro, like, that's high risk.
few landmarks down below, and then that flight would land back in New Zealand. That was the whole thing. It was just a chance to go out and see Antarctica and take photos. Peter had been a tour guide for this flight many times before, and so he knew what to expect. He not only knew kind of how passengers react, but he also knew exactly when to look out which side of the plane to get the best view. And so after a couple of minutes, he called out to the passengers, hey, if you look out the left side of the plane, you'll get a great view of the coast of Antarctica. So all the passengers, they immediately get up and shift over to the left side of the plane, and they press their cameras up against the glass. They're taking photos. And then a couple of minutes later, Peter called out to the group again and said, okay, now look out the right side where you'll see Mount Erebus, this huge, stunning mountain. Now, Peter was accustomed to people gasping when they saw this mountain because it was so beautiful, so enormous.
That is hard, bro.
And as people piled up against the right side and began taking photos, that's what he heard. People were gasping. But then at the same time, the plane suddenly jolted hard, and one of those passengers on the right side took this photo. As you can see, there are black marks on the window, and these black marks are believed to be either engine oil or soot from Mount Erebus. Because Mount Erebus was not just some mountain. Mount Erebus was an active volcano, and the flight path of TE-901 was supposed to have them going safely around Mount Erebus to get a nice full view of the volcano. But mistakes were made, and before the pilots could correct them, the plane flew directly into the volcano. And so this photo you're looking at almost certainly was taken literally at the moment of impact. A crash that resulted in 237 lives lost.
Dude,
the crash of flight TE-901
bro.
was the worst aviation disaster in New Zealand history. And as a result, Air New Zealand no longer offers those sightseeing flights.
Hot snow.
At 5:30 a.m. on July 16, 1945, a 13-year-old girl named Barbara Kent was sleeping inside of a cabin in Ruidoso, New Mexico, where she was staying for a sleepover summer dance camp. And as she slept, suddenly there was this loud booming sound that literally shook her awake and actually caused her to fall out of her bed onto the floor. Barbara sat up feeling totally confused, and she looked around the cabin and she saw the 9 other girls that were also here for the sleepover camp. They too were wide awake, and some of them also had fallen onto the floor. And so the girls, they're all freaking out. They're looking at each other like, what's going on here? What was that? And as this kind of pandemonium is ensuing, their lead dance instructor came running into the cabin and told the girls that she thought one of the cabin's heaters had exploded and that potentially there could be a fire somewhere on the camp. And so all the girls, they're already totally panicked. Now they're getting really scared. And the instructor's just like, all right, girls, go outside, stand by the river. I'm gonna go find wherever this explosion happened and make sure everything is okay. And so the girls, they were led outside, totally a mess, and they went and stood by this river near the cabin and waited for their instructor to go look around. And so Barbara and the 9 other girls, they're totally terrified, and they're standing by this riverbank, and they're kind of looking around the property, seeing if they can see smoke or fire, but they can't. And as they're standing there waiting for their instructor to come back, Barbara felt something hit the tip of her nose, and it was cold and soft. And she looked up and she realized it was snowing. But it's July in New Mexico. It should not be snowing. But sure enough, snow was coming down from the sky. And as the snow came down on Barbara, she looked at the other girls, and they too were looking up and putting their hands up and letting the snow hit them in the face. They couldn't believe it. I mean, this was like a totally rare weather event. And so a minute later, their dance instructor came back and told the girls that, she looked all over the camp and there did not appear to be a fire or an explosion of any kind, that everything seemed fine.
Not gonna lie, I feel like something radioactive probably happened. Something like in that weather, like that was just super rare. It wasn't supposed to happen. And something crazy about to happen. That snow ain't snow, you know what I'm saying, type shit.
But, by all accounts, it seems safe here. And so the girls were very relieved to hear this, but already their attention had completely shifted to the snow. I mean, again, it's July in New Mexico. There shouldn't be snow. And so the girls, they turned to their instructor and they're like, okay, well, now that it's safe, would it be okay if we put on our bathing suits and just went swimming in the river while it snowed on us? I mean, this is incredible. And the instructor, who to this point had really been focused on finding the fire and the hazard or whatever, now that she knew things were safe, she kind of took in the scene and also suddenly appreciated how unbelievable it was that there was snow coming down. And so she told the girls, yeah, get your bathing suits, go swimming, enjoy this. This is totally like a once-in-a-lifetime moment here. And so very excited.
Sadly. It ain't. It's gonna be the worst shit ever, I promise you.
Barbara and the other girls ran back into the cabin, they changed into their swimwear, and then a moment later, they were out frolicking in the river as the snow fell on top of them. And for hours, they just played in the river and enjoyed the snow.
Hours?
And the snow was kind of building up on the riverbanks, and so some of the girls went over and scooped it up and rubbed it on their faces and
it doesn't
made
count,
snowballs,
though,
and they just had a great time. And at one point, the dance instructor came by and actually took a picture of Barbara, who was right in the middle of the river enjoying this bizarre scene. But eventually, despite how fun the snow was, the novelty of it all sort of wore off, and the girls got tired of swimming, so they changed into their regular clothes and went about their day.
All right.
And over the course of the next few days, summer camp went as normal. The girls had a great time, and when summer camp ended, all the girls went home. Now, the girls never got an explanation for why it had snowed. They all just assumed it was some super rare weather event that they had been lucky enough to experience. Until 17 years later, when Barbara was 30 years old at this point, and she learned that all the other girls she had gone to the dance camp with had died. One by one, each of those girls were diagnosed with aggressive forms of cancer that killed them. Barbara was the only one who was spared. And she wouldn't get any clarification as to why that had happened until decades later in 2006, when Barbara was in her 70s, when the government finally came out and admitted the truth. It would turn out Barbara's dance instructor was correct in thinking there had been an explosion on July 16, 1945. But of course, it was not any of the cabin's heaters or anything local to the cabin or the camp.
Hold on, the government responded, so that might mean the government had something to do with that shit. Maybe they did something on accident, or it wasn't supposed to go like it, and it went towards boom.
Instead, the explosion occurred 40 miles away at a U.S. government testing site in the middle of the Mexico desert.
That's
And the
not funny. That's not. I'm not
literally
laughing at
caused
that.
the girls to be
I
dumped out
called
of their
it, bro.
beds was from the world's first ever atomic bomb being dropped. It was the Manhattan Project's
Whoa,
Trinity
that's
test,
crazy.
a test that no civilians in the area had been
Was
warned
supposed
about.
to.
And so after this bomb detonated, there was this nuclear fallout that rained from the sky on 500,000 people that lived within a 150-mile radius of the detonation site.
They
And
tripping.
within those 500,000 people were those 10 innocent teenage girls at their dance camp. The snow that the girls played in was actually radioactive material from
That's
this
crazy,
nuclear
bro.
fallout raining down from the sky that over the course of 17 years would give 9 of the girls various forms of cancer that would kill them. Here is the picture that the dance instructor took of Barbara posing in the middle of the river
see all that white
as the
stuff
snow
over
is
there?
falling all around her. As you
Nuclear
can see,
shit,
Barbara
man.
is
It's
smiling
crazy.
and looking up at the snow, not realizing it's literally going to kill almost everyone in that picture. As for Barbara, she did not die young. However, she would suffer from multiple cancers and illnesses,
That's crazy.
all associated with radiation exposure.
Man, she a warrior, man. Rest in peace to everybody in this video, for real, man. It's sad.
In case-
Alright, that'll be it for the video. Make sure y'all like, share, and subscribe, and I'll make more videos like this. See y'all later. Peace.